I'm Dan.
And I'm Alex.
And welcome back to On Air. It is another Wednesday, and we're together to talk to all of you guys. How you doing, Alex?
There's so much that I want to get through. I feel like once again, it's been one of those weeks where quite a few headlines I've been keeping track of, pinging across to you on WhatsApp just to make sure that we don't miss it by the time the next episode comes around. So I'm pleased that we're here and we're ready to sit down and discuss what's been happening. But first, I want to ask you, you were just in Riyadh, right? You've just landed this second from Riyadh, right?
Yeah, I literally hopped off the plane, not at LAX, but then hopped off the plane with a dream and my on-air login, and now I'm here to talk to you guys. But I just have to say,
how was Riyadh?
I mean, Riyadh is Riyadh. The brand is really branding. And
oh, please.
You don't know Riyadh. If you're asking me how was Riyadh. No, but I have to show you because literally the first thing we see, so we stayed overnight at an airport hotel. The first thing we see when we pull out of the airport, guys, if you're just listening, Alex can explain what he sees.
Wow, okay. So it's the big Riyadh Air headquarter building.
It is
with
massive.
A massive Riyadh logo.
A massive Riyadh logo. And the funny thing is, to us, I associate Riyadh Air with events, with something that doesn't exist in real life yet. So seeing the office, this was the view from our hotel room. I was like, oh my goodness, we got to see it in daytime. And then we pull up to the airport and guess what I see there for the very first time ever? There's 787 parked in the sunshine. It's not the fully purple livery because, you know, the current one they have is white and
is the second livery, the white and indigo one.
Exactly. With a plane that actually belongs to Oman Air, but that they're using at the moment, that you occasionally see fly around on Flight Radar. So I was just like, I got to see Riyadh Air come to life, which was so cool, you know?
That's cool.
So
yeah, that's cool. I mean, you know, in the absence of any aircraft deliveries, it's about as much as you're going to get in terms of a sign of life at any airline that doesn't exist yet. So it's not bad.
And I have a lot of questions about Riyadh Airport, how they're going to fit in there. Obviously, Riyadh is opening a new airport eventually, but at the moment, it is very crowded. Even Saudia has a lounge the size of a refrigerator. So there's no space. Although the airport is beautiful, the terminal is beautiful. I'm curious how another airline that aims to serve 100 destinations 5 years from now, how are
the way you're looking at your watch is like as if it's 500 destinations by 3:30.
Yeah, literally. I'm like, are you joking? Like, it's only in 5 years they want to serve 100 destinations. So we'll see. Yeah, that's exciting. But the way I got to Riyadh was almost more exciting because I got to fly my favorite airplane in the whole world, possibly for the last time ever, the Airbus A350-600.
Ooh, I didn't know that. As in, I knew it was your favorite aircraft, but I didn't know that that's what you had flown into Riyadh on. That is a dinosaur, you know, on the verge of full extinction.
And it is so underappreciated. Maybe it's not the most comfortable plane. It's equivalent to an A330. So passenger comfort-wise, it's not wow. But when you look at that wing and you see two fat engines on your little A330 wing that looks like it's gonna almost dip because the outer engine is so heavy.
The flex,
It is, when there's turbulence, the wing is it's just amazing. And let's not even talk about from the outside, when you see those birds, when you see them landing, it is, you have to agree that it's an elegant plane.
I agree it is an elegant aircraft. I agree it is, it's still, I mean, it looks unusual when it's airborne. I notice if I'm with friends and in the very rare scenario that we come across one, they're like, what is that pencil looking thing? Remember Iberia used to send them between Madrid and London?
I know.
Before Iberia took delivery of the A350s. And of course, IAG still have that arrangement with Iberia flying wide bodies between the two hubs for cargo reasons.
Yeah.
But it was always just like, wow, that's only come from, you know, an hour and a half away. That long aircraft.
What a treat. I mean, Heathrow was an A340-600 lover's paradise back when Virgin had them. They were there all over. But now I noticed, I mean, just a quick tangent to Iberia, that they're flying the A321 XLR on the Heathrow route occasionally, which I guess is great for passengers.
Yeah, I think that's more of a crew familiarization. But it's... do you know, the other day I was sitting lining up for takeoff at Heathrow, and I just had this realization. Oh my God, I thought, I have forgotten that it was just a few years ago that I would look out of this aircraft window and see dozens of 747s in the BA livery. And that was the look of London. When you watch a film, be it The Parent Trap or you know, any of these films that show scenes in London, it's like the iconic 747 in the BA livery is shown. And it looks like London when you look out and you see those aircraft. And I was thinking, I've so quickly forgotten that was just and I also hate how sudden the 747s were phased out because of COVID, and it was just like they pulled the plug on it, and I feel we never had that chance to say goodbye. It seems crazy to be sentimental about, you know, an aircraft, but I think so many people will resonate that Heathrow and London, it doesn't look like London when you look out without those 747s, and it's just like, it's a shame. And you know, the same is true as we've spoken time and time again about how the A380s have all become increasingly rare. And when we say, you know, remember when we used to, and maybe Emirates will be the last man standing with them. But other than those, it's going to be something that we don't come across often.
I know. You're so right about how sad it is that we didn't get it. Like, it wasn't just a gradual phase out. It was all at once. I feel that although the 747 is more extreme, but I feel that way with the likes of Air France's A380s or Thai Airways, where they were so normal. And now I see a photo of it and I'm like, was that even real? Like, it feels so
You're
unfamiliar.
So right. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like it was decades ago, and it wasn't. It was just 5 minutes ago in the grand scheme of things. And as you say, I think because there wasn't that recognition, we weren't, I mean, let alone not flying. We were not outside of our homes when those decisions were being taken. So by the time we then re-emerged and then started flying again and the world starts, you know, a couple of years had already passed. And that was something that, as you say, just feels like it was much, you know, longer ago than it was.
Yeah, there was so much else to focus on at the time. And even in the years after, as aviation was ramping up, that all the aircraft that got retired sort of got lost in the mix. And as you're saying this, I'm trying to think of my last BA 747 flight. And I'm like, oh yes, back in the 90s, I flew from Kuwait to London. And then I'm like, that wasn't the 90s. That was 2019. I flew a British Airways 747 from Kuwait to London. And now, not only is aircraft gone, but the route is gone.
Do you remember we had breakfast in Qatar? You flew to Kuwait.
Yeah.
I flew from Doha, you flew from Kuwait, and we met in London the next morning. And you had just flown a Kuwait 747.
Because we were going to that duty-free event. Oh my God.
We were going to a duty-free event, Yeah, where we got loads of duty-free stuff.
That was amazing. We were like, what is this? But anyway.
Yeah, that was unusual. Yeah, anyway, look, we've got so much to get onto. I don't want to just reminisce. Let's go to this. This was arguably one of the biggest stories of the week. Very, very, very concerning. A lot of people will have seen this. Many of you may have missed it. But a Lufthansa flight, and this is not something that has happened over the last week, but rather the report has now been published. A Lufthansa flight was left without any conscious pilot at the controls for just over 10 minutes after the first officer, who was alone in the cockpit at the time, became incapacitated and ultimately, you know, fell into almost a state of unconsciousness during the cruise. So this happened when the captain temporarily left the flight deck to go to the bathroom. And upon return, he tried to enter the flight deck by calling the flight deck for the first officer to verify on the camera that it's the captain, press the button and open the door. And that didn't happen. So he tried again and it didn't happen. Then he tried the emergency access code, which still requires somebody inside the flight deck to authorize the entry as a final point of security. Well, it didn't happen because the pilot, the first officer at the controls, was now incapacitated. He had collapsed in his seat. And while trying to figure out, the captain, what to do and not cause any alarm to passengers, the first officer started to regain some consciousness and was able just, they describe in the report, to authorize and press the button to allow the captain to re-enter. Thank heavens, because then the captain was able to take control of the aircraft. The first officer was taken for medical treatment by the crew and seen to. The staggering, extraordinary part of this is that this happened on Lufthansa. You won't need me to remind you about what German wings at the time, former Eurowings, and the horrific crash that happened that is alleged to have been pilot suicide when one of the pilots went out to the bathroom and the pilots at the command put the aircraft into a descent towards the mountains, killing everyone on board. In the immediate aftermath of that event, we had Lufthansa change their policy like many airlines, requiring 2 people to be in the flight deck at all times. How does that work out in reality? It means that if the captain in this scenario needs to go to the bathroom, he swaps with a cabin crew member. The cabin crew sit in the seat. That way there's always 2. Yes, they're not flying. They're not at the controls. They're not trained. But there's someone else in there, a fresh pair of eyes, hands, and so on. And then they swap again when the captain returns. Lufthansa did have that policy for about just over a year. And they decided it was no longer needed. And here we are now, all these years later, with almost another Germanwings style incident if that first officer did not regain consciousness. How utterly terrifying.
Well, the crazy thing is that it's been a while since 9/11, right? But the aviation industry was so shaped by that incident and by hijackings before 9/11 that luckily in the years since, hijackings have become very, very rare. But we still have all these safety systems in place to prevent hijackings. Yet it feels like more often than not, there are more potential safety risks in a situation like this where a pilot can't get into the cockpit because we're trying to prevent a hijacking when one pilot is incapacitated. So airlines and the industry needs to decide, are we doing 2 people in the cockpit at all times? Because otherwise, that is a safety risk. And people can have heart attacks or they can become incapacitated, as you said.
Yeah.
And then,
what do you think? Do you think that there should always be a minimum of 2?
Absolutely. There's no reason not to. And the fact that there's one person in a cockpit that could require, or that does require, someone else's approval to get into as a safety mechanism that could then potentially lock someone else out, even unknowingly, it's crazy. So either you remove that system whereby only someone on the inside can open it, at least temporarily while there's only one person inside if someone is leaving, or you ensure that there's at least 2 people in the cockpit at the same time. We have these rules, for example, where pilots are not allowed to eat the same meals because they might get food poisoning. So they have to eat different options off the onboard menu. Yet we have something so crazy obvious like this, where you still allow one person, however, without any medical tests, to be sitting there alone. I think it's bizarre.
I just can't believe that they haven't learnt from it. Obviously they haven't, because this was quietly a policy that was quietly withdrawn shortly after being, initiated for the first time, with Lufthansa seemingly decided it wasn't necessary. Now, there are many airlines that do this. In the US, airlines kind of still bring out the cart, don't they, and block the cockpit door, so that way they're blocking the aisle access to the forward galley, and then one comes in, one comes out, and most US airlines have that policy. In fact, it may even be FAA policy. I would need to double check. In Europe, I can think of Ryanair. Ryanair also follow that same model. So Ryanair, I don't know if they still do this now, and I will admit it has been a long time since I've flown Ryanair, but I think my last flight was just before the pandemic, and they put the seatbelt sign on, brought the trolley out, blocked the cockpit, one out, one in, they stay in, they wait, captain comes out the bathroom, they swap, they move the trolley, they turn the fasten seatbelt sign off. And it was a whole choreographed sequence. I wonder if that's still the case today. Perhaps one of the listeners can let us know. But
well,
for many airlines,
just to make a crass joke, Ryanair likes hard landings, but not crash landings. That's why.
Well, Ryanair, famous for their hard landings, but thankfully with an impeccable safety record. So it's, we have to hand it to them, and also impeccable financial results, which we will come to shortly. This just seems so obvious to me. And I think I'm quite sure that the listeners will just think, how can something like this? Because the reality is this: if that first officer did not regain consciousness, I don't need to then describe what then would follow. It's utterly terrifying. Aircraft are not able to be operated remotely. No one's able to kind of hack into the autopilot and take control of the aircraft, thankfully, because that would pose more of a threat than a help. But again, as you said, the industry has spent so long figuring out how to keep the bad guy from outside in, they've forgotten about what happens in. And this is just another development of that.
Yeah, and also this just points to Lufthansa is already not good from a passenger experience perspective. Can they at least be good from a safety perspective? Can they at least do something to prevent incidents like this when the Lufthansa Group is the company that had the original incident that led to all these policies around the world? And I hate to, fearmonger. And I just got a message yesterday, actually, from a listener, Marco, who was like, I'm on a flight currently overflying Afghanistan. We're about to overfly Iran. And because of you guys, I'm now scared because we keep bringing people's attention to... We're not saying they should be scared, but we do talk about the airspace you're in, and we bring attention to that because a lot of people don't think about what countries they're flying over. And another thing we've said before on the podcast, which, I hate to bring up things to worry about, but I'm not worried about planes technically, safety-wise. But the one thing that is the biggest concern for me is pilot mental health. So
absolutely, it is, and combine pilot mental health with fatigue.
Yes,
right.
Those two. So it is really concerning, to see that we don't have systems in place a decade after the German wings incident to prevent.
We need the industry to prioritize the health and well-being of pilots, because I do think they are taken for granted in that we have the safest industry in the world, the safest form of transport in the world. And it's taken for granted because these are human beings, and they're navigating life just like everyone else, but they're probably significantly more tired than the average person because of especially if you're at long-haul airlines or airlines that operate at hub and spoke model airports. And they're going through things that everyone else is going through. They're going through things like divorce. They're going through things like loss, like grief, like all these things that chip away and take a toll on an individual. We don't need to then be risking and adding fuel to that situation by having a policy where there isn't someone just to keep one of the pilots company with small talk, with ensuring they don't fall asleep, with ensuring their well-being, in a scenario like what we saw play out with this Lufthansa flight.
Yeah, 100% agree. And not to mention loneliness, which, for people who work in aviation, loneliness is a huge problem because you're constantly in a new hotel on the other side of the world. You're tired. You don't know people.
Yeah,
and
time zones.
It's all very tough. But I would love if you could tell us about some positive things. So we have some very cool financial results that came out over the past week.
So it's obviously we're in May now, so we're in the weeks that have followed the end of the last financial year for most airlines that follow that financial year calendar. That's the year ending March 31st, 2025 this year. The kind of three big results that have come out over the last few days that I just wanted to take the listeners through. Singapore Airlines having their second highest profits in the history of the airline, not beating last year's record results, but still significant with a net profit of $1.98 billion US dollars. Now, they are sharing some of that with staff, which is great. Staff are getting just over 7 months bonus of their salaries, which is fantastic news for the employees of the Singapore Airlines group. Their revenue stood at I've only got it in Singaporean dollars. It's 19 Singaporean dollars. Their passenger load factor was at 88.1%. But crucially, there has been a softening. Now, their results were not as good as last year. They say that is because competition is now back and fierce. They say that because of the resumption of different routes, different airlines, different and aircraft that have been parked for a few years in Asia, they are now feeling the effects of that, and their results are not as strong as last year because of that. Now, I wanted to highlight that because you and I were in Singapore and we spoke about how perhaps the greatest threat to an airline like Singapore right now were the Chinese carriers and the way in which the Chinese airlines are dumping capacity, tons of capacity, offering passengers the lowest fares. And I don't just mean passengers going to and from China, because believe me, they're not. These are fares that are being offered to Australians that are going to Europe and vice versa, and all in between. And as a result, Singapore's results were not as strong, noting that they are now under this fierce competition and the return of competition that wasn't there a year ago. That's China for all intents and purposes, as they had a slower return. Interestingly, my cousins are coming to Europe over the summer from Australia, and they've been screenshotting me, as I'm sure you get as well. You know, what about this flight? What about that flight? What's fine? And they've been showing me Emirates and Qatar and Singapore Airlines and Qantas. Qantas is ridiculously expensive. Anyway, and then they said, we're not sure about the airline and we're not sure about the transit city, ... but this fare was really low. And I said, go on, send it to me. And of course, it was with China Eastern. And I was thinking, wow, there, you know, there's the living example of the fact. And it was significantly cheaper. So much so that she was thinking the flight time was bad. She doesn't know anything about the airline, doesn't know anything about the food quality, doesn't know about the transit city. But can you say no when the price is right?
Yeah, not to mention that China Eastern has very competitive seats, not the best food, but also Shanghai is an awesome transit city, especially if you get like 24 hours there, you go visa-free transit.
Amazing.
It is a very competitive offering.
Yeah. So Singapore Airlines doing very well, but not as great as last year with that challenge. The other major airline to announce their financial results this week was Qatar Airways, Doha based. They announced a 28% increase in profits versus last year. That is a huge percentage point increase of 28% for that profit. So last year, they were at $1.67 billion US. This year, the entire Qatar Airways group profit stands at $2.15 billion US. Group revenue up 6%. Now, 6% in terms of group revenue being up 6%, that's not that much compared with the fact that their profits had increased by a whopping 28%. So that does go to show that when the airlines have a strategy that doesn't just focus on getting A to B in terms of the mainline airline, but branches out into equity investments and different areas of the group, boy, does that pay off when things are done correctly.
Yeah,
the
unlike
final
Etihad
point
in the 2010s.
Yeah, well, Etihad's in the 2010s. We can do a whole episode on Etihad in the 2010s, bless him. But the final point on Qatar's results, this is a fantastic stat which goes to show the kind of globalization of aviation, right, and how the world is getting smaller. Qatar Airways now has, in any 24-hour period, 5,000 flights daily with a Qatar Airways flight number on it. So through their code sharing, their interline agreements, their equity investment partnerships, 5,000 flights daily with that flight number on it. That is huge. They highlighted their exceptional profit and the margin of expansion, despite obviously the difficult supply chain. Speaking of supply chain, Ryanair coming out punching. The CEO is ready to earn a big bonus because their results were very, very good. But I wanted to speak less about the results and more about the comments with Boeing. Michael O'Leary says he is very happy with the place that Boeing is in right now. And I've told you this is all I keep hearing from the industry. Boeing are very quiet. They're not in the headlines. I have seen the Boeing CEOs, both Kelly and Stephanie Pope, at various events, state visits, so they've been around the region here in the Middle East, of course, last week, but then also they've been around at different conferences, and they're being quiet, they're being modest. they're working on right sizing, they're working on quality, and I keep hearing this echoed. So Ryanair think that they will have one of their most successful summers ever because of the Boeing deliveries that are set to commence. The 737 MAX was set to have some good news about the production returning to a decent pace for 737s over the coming days. In fact, that news may drop by the time this episode goes out later today. The funny part is how travel dynamics change for each airline. Ryanair noting that while summer is absolutely packed, they said they can count the number of people who have booked for like October and November like on two hands. They said because that's just not how Ryanair passengers behave. Everything is last minute because they offer such low fares.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, obviously Ryanair is not doing any bonuses because that's not their thing. Has Qatar Airways announced bonuses?
So Qatar Airways announced bonuses internally rather than externally, like what Singapore Airlines did. And I am of the understanding that Qatar Airways bonus will be announced to staff over the coming couple of weeks. So hopefully they're also in for a good. And it's great because we're seeing all these airlines ultimately profit share. We saw the same with Emirates. As I said, Singapore Airlines have done it. And I always wonder, I mean, are the airlines doing it that we hear very, very little from? Are they doing it? The airlines that are profitable but are not loud?
That's a good question. I feel like we would hear it somehow if one of them had done a very generous bonus. Maybe it wouldn't be a headline, but it would still come out through Reddit or something. But I mean, I think it's good that at airlines like Singapore Airlines, Emirates, the airlines are giving huge bonuses, as Qatar should, because these are some of the airlines with the strictest service procedures where the crew works so hard. They fly so many hours. These guys really deserve their bonuses.
100%, they deserve it. I'm also glad it's become the norm for these big airlines. Like the bonuses have become the norm. Now that wasn't always the case years ago.
Yeah.
Of course, their profits were not like they are now. So
yeah, exactly. Bonus on a huge loss. But no, this is right. Yeah, it's great news, and it brings us to another airline that is doing very well profitability wise and has announced some interesting new. Well, first of all, we can start with United's brand new Polaris cabin, which came out after we recorded last week. What did you think when you saw it?
I thought it looked smart. I thought it looked good. I am seeing, I mean, tons of new. I feel like it's every week we've got a major airline with a new cabin. That United, I wasn't aware that a new Polaris was coming. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is only for the Dreamliners, right?
For now,
or it's debuting for now. Yes.
It's
So
only
it's
on
debuting
future
on the
deliveries. It's not going to be
future deliveries. It's not going to. Okay, and Polaris is a solid US product. The soft product probably could go a little further, but the actual, hard product, which in aviation is the seat and everything you can touch, is smart and private and comfortable. And they have great bedding from Saks Fifth Avenue. And Delta announced new bedding. Did you see with Missoni?
Yeah, let's not change topics this fast.
No, I'm not. Sorry. Just on the note of bedding. Anyway, but I thought the cabin looked very smart. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, it looks smart. The thing I've said, I think since we started on air, that makes, if I have to commend United for something, it is their incredible consistency of having the exact same business class seat on every single internationally flown wide-body aircraft in their fleet. That is
true.
And not to mention that United is one of the biggest airlines in the world. To be able to pull that off is truly commendable. Now we're going to see one more seat introduced. So there will be a bit more inconsistency. But if you compare that to pretty much any other airline in the world, including their US competitors, it's still a lot less and it's still good. The seat looks nice. I will say I had a good laugh when I saw the internet explode and Americans are like, oh my God, my life has changed forever. And we're just like, this seat has been on Hawaiian Airlines for several years already, not to mention these other airlines all over the world.
Yeah.
And they're talking like it's the new Q suite, we're just like, okay, guys, let's tone it down a little bit. And frankly, we've flown this seat and it's not the best.
No, it's not the best, but
it's not the worst, but it's not the best.
It's not the worst, but it's not the worst. I mean, look, I'm happy for them. I like the fact that airlines are reinvesting, and United are performing fantastically financially. Of course, their service leaves a lot to be desired when you compare them on a global stage. We've spoken in depth about that, and I will commend them for that excellent app. I mean, that mobile app is fantastic, and the stuff you can do. I mean, why isn't I don't understand why every airline hasn't just said, let's just copy the United app. Let's just do everything that United app can do. And of course I do, because some are using old infrastructure, old IT, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, my favorite thing about United is the app.
Good. I mean, United they have a lot of things they do well. There's just some things that are so poor that we need to, get that up to standard. I think the most interesting thing here, of course, is the 8 front row seats, which I forget. I think they're going to call them the Polaris suite. Right?
This pattern, honestly, where now all airlines have woken up in 2025 and said, I know, why are all seats equal? That's boring.
Yeah.
Let's have the first 2 rows of something, then the next 2 rows of something. I don't like it, to be honest, but it's where we are.
I don't like it, but at the same time, they're using space that was dead space before. So they're utilizing space to offer something slightly better for those who want it. I prefer that they do what most airlines are doing rather than what Etihad and Starlux do, where they have a slightly better seat in the front row. And on Starlux, this is bizarre that they do this. And they charge 2 or 3 times the price of business and call it first class. This is business plus. It's not a slightly better business seat is not first class, guys.
You've just taken me back to when I was a kid and Norwegian first ever took delivery of their Dreamliners, right? And they were flying between London and Oslo. And the premium cabin and the economy cabin were bookable as one economy cabin on the seat map. Yeah, and people were booking into premium, which is significantly, upgraded compared to economy. And
I mean, I love any time that happens. It's like the same. Even Qatar Airways has those Cathay 777s where you can. I mean, you need status to get it for free, but being able to get a premium economy seat at basically an economy price is the best. And some airlines also that are leasing Cathay Pacific 777s, I think Air New Zealand, for example, let you choose first class seats even though you're flying business as well. So, that's awesome. Instead of just trying to upsell.
Sticking with United, did you see a female passenger filed a lawsuit against United Airlines? Welcome to the United States. Nothing newsworthy there. But she is claiming discrimination and negligence after the cabin crew refused to help lift her heavy bag into the overhead locker. So she had asked the cabin crew to help her lift the bag. They refused. She asked again. They refused. And now she's suing United. The individual alleges that she was injured while attempting to stow the bag herself after being told by the crew that her bag was not their responsibility. I mean, I'll just remind listeners, United's policy is consistent with many US carriers. Not just many US carriers, many carriers globally, which is that crew are not required to lift passenger luggage, and that is for liability and for safety reasons for themselves. I mean, the crew didn't do anything wrong here. And I feel like, if the individual genuinely was injured by attempting to stow the bag herself, she shouldn't have brought such a heavy bag on board, because the policy should be you have to be able to lift it. And I don't know about you, but I cringe when I board an airline. And, there's this she's younger than me, she's smaller than me, she's like a petite young crew member is insisting she wants to put my bag in the locker. And I am very firm in saying no, because that is absolutely not on, and it's not her responsibility. She's doing enough in that moment, and I wouldn't let a guy do it either. It's my bag, and it's for me to lift. And if I can't lift it, then I shouldn't be bringing it onto the aircraft.
I 100% agree, and I think a lot of people, as we've said, people get airport brain. They just sometimes turn off, and they expect everyone to handle things for them like they're kids.
Yeah,
that includes handling their bags. I often get asked, because I'm tall, to put people's bags in the lockers and to take them out if they're short. Normally, I oblige because I can do it, and their bags aren't filled with gold bars, so they don't weigh 100 kilos. But for the crew to do it, I agree. It's nothing you should ever expect. Of course, if there's like a small elderly woman, then yeah, maybe someone can help out.
And I am always looking around, like I'm staggered when, for example, if I fly with my twin sister, okay, and she's on across the aisle, so I can't reach that locker on that side, and she's small, Demi, right? And so she wants to get her bag, but she can't, and there's like two grown men next to her, and they're like, with their necks like this, swiping on their phone. And I'm thinking, somebody help her, please. Can we, or so then I go to the front, through the galley, through the back to get it down. There's that. There's also a funny kind of thing that happened to me on a Montreal flight. There was a gentleman. He was in his, I would guess, early 70s, and it was when I was on BA. He was in the yin yang kind of seat in front. And when we landed, he was frail, right? He's like looking at his bag, and I said to him, "Oh, don't worry, sir, I'll get that for you." And he said, "Oh, no, you will not." He said, like, tapped my arm, and no, he was like, "No," and he was properly pissed off, and I was like, "Okay." Sorry,
good on him. Yeah.
I mean, okay, good on him that he was trying, but I was worried because that bag looked heavy, and he was like frail, but. Okay.
Yeah, you don't want any incidents. That's true. Sometimes because of language barriers, it ends up being like, of course, I'm happy to help anyone, but sometimes when people can't like communicate it to you, I'll be like grabbed on the shoulder, just like this, and then they just point up at their bag, and I'm just like, okay, I guess I'll do you a favor.
I think they point at your bag person. And you go to them. Oh no, ma'am, that's not my bag.
Yes, that's
and
what
then you disembark.
Yeah. Oh, ma'am, no, I have my bags right here.
Yeah, you go, oh, bless you. You thought that ugly green one was mine.
There was like a scary, I mean, not scary, but an incident like a month ago when Oscar and I were flying Lufthansa Allegris, because we were alternating between the suite in row 2 and the last seat in the cabin, row 7. So we could try these two different seats. So during landing, I was in the suite, but I had left my bag back at 7 while Oscar's carry-on was over me in row 2. So I was like, okay, I'll take Oscar's bag since I'm sitting here. So I took his bag, I disembark. Because Oscar was like chatting to someone. So I was like, I'll just get off and wait in the jetway. But then they're like, no, you can't wait here. So I had to walk like all the way up to the terminal. And then Oscar calls me and he's like, where's my bag? And I'm like, don't worry, I have it. So then he's like, okay. And then he disembarks and he shows up empty-handed. I'm like, where is my bag? And he's like, oh, I thought you took it. I'm like, what do you mean you thought I took you thought I took my bag? You were sitting by my bag.
You know what? I don't think this is very fair because we're only hearing one side of the story. All right. So, okay, we'll take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, I kind of believe it happened, but but we'll see. Listen, we've got a few questions. Let's move into Q&A.
Let's do it. If you ever stay at luxury hotels, whether or not you have status at those hotel chains, I recommend going to nonstopdan.com/hotels to check out booking your future luxury hotel stays there. Because by booking through a travel advisor like us, you will get a bunch of more benefits at luxury hotels like daily breakfast for 2, room upgrades subject to availability, early check-in and late checkout, a $100 property credit or food and beverage credit, a welcome amenity, VIP status at the hotel, and if you already have status, this will give you even higher priority for upgrades. In fact, people booking through travel advisors get the highest priority for upgrades at hotels. So once again, go to nonstopdan.com/hotels to book your next luxury hotel stay.
Okay, so Hugo has been very patient in waiting for a response on this. Hugo asks, I live in Lisbon and frequently notice that TAP Air Portugal operate their 330neo on short 1.5-hour domestic routes to Madeira, sometimes even twice a day. Typically, the route is served by their A320s, so seeing a widebody like the A330neo definitely caught my attention because I've always understood it to be primarily a long-haul aircraft. Is it common for airlines to deploy such large aircraft on short European routes? And if so, what is the reasoning behind this? So the quick answer, Hugo, is that many airlines operate their wide-body aircraft on short-haul routes primarily for 2 reasons. Or rather, let's do the 3 key reasons, right? 1, cargo, because there is sufficient cargo demand to justify a wide-body aircraft with extra cargo capacity. 2, to boost aircraft utilization, meaning the aircraft will have ordinarily been on the ground, perhaps between 2 long-haul flights, and therefore, given an aircraft is only able to make money when flying, let's get it airborne and have that aircraft utilized on a short flight. Or 3, if there is sufficient passenger demand to justify the increased capacity in flying a long-haul aircraft, despite the fact that the economics typically can be worse in terms of efficiency on something like the 330neo, probably does make sense. So for Lisbon to Madeira, it's one of the 3, and it could change day to day as to why they deploy the aircraft on that route. A certain day there's sufficient cargo, other day there's sufficient passenger demand, other times the aircraft was going to be on the ground sitting for 8 hours, so why not send it to Madeira and back to get it to make money, freeing up an A320 for elsewhere.
Great answer. I have a question here from Lucas, who is asking about last week's episode where we spoke about huge profits this year, of course, also mentioned in this episode. He's saying, that said, airfares have been noticeably more expensive this year. I travel annually between London and Buenos Aires, a route which usually costs me around £800 to £1,000 in economy. This year, it's looking more like £1,200 to £1,600, and that's indirect in economy. I realize airlines face challenges with limited supply and high operating costs, but given the healthy demand and profits, will we see airfares coming down soon, or is this the new status quo?
Ooh.
I mean, my take is that airlines are in a very cocky position right now. They're doing stuff to their loyalty programs that's customer unfriendly.
A great phrase. Like, I like what you just said. You're so right.
Yeah, because we go through these periods where airlines just feel like they are in charge. They don't need to, think about their most loyal customers in terms of pricing, in terms of benefits. So I don't see airfares going down anytime soon. I also don't see airlines investing that much to improve their customer experiences if they're not in very competitive environments. I don't see them improving their loyalty programs. I think we're in a pretty bleak period for air travelers out of that perspective. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. It really does depend. I mean, on the route mentioned between London and Buenos Aires, there isn't that much competition. I mean, there is indirectly, of course, but there isn't that much compared to, for example, a route, if you were to take a route of that length, but flip it to the other side to Asia. And so, yeah, I mean, that if it's almost like if one agrees to bump up that fare, then they all follow, and then suddenly that's the average fare price for this year. There are complications, as you know, and there are uncertainties ahead. And airlines are going to justify their higher fares because they can now. And this was our worry about the tariffs, right? Even if tariffs and the global market uncertainty are not yet having that financial impact on airlines, boy, are they going to use it as an excuse to justify increasing their fares. And that was our primary concern, wasn't it, Dan, about the tariffs?
Because I think the misunderstanding that people have is that airlines will just, if flights get more empty, they just sit around and operate fewer flights at lower prices. But airlines have gotten smarter over the years. Nowadays, what they gladly do is reduce capacity by putting in smaller aircraft or reducing frequencies, also that they can keep their prices at those high levels. They would rather be as profitable as possible than fly, fewer passengers on a slightly emptier flight with lower, or even have a full flight at lower prices. Even if they're making a profit, they don't want to be that generous. So that's very the unfortunate reality. And, I think Emirates is a good example. They're now the most, on paper, profitable airline in the world. And if you look at their prices, they are crazy high. And they just announced last week that they're removing first class redemptions to anyone who's not an elite member in their frequent flyer program. These are what airlines do. These are the things they do when they're doing well. And it's unfortunate for all of us.
You're right. Sticking with Emirates, I've got a question on Emirates. The airport aviation account has messaged us saying, if Emirates wants more planes with the new game-changing first-class seats, why have they not ordered the Airbus A350-1000, which would fit the suites on the aircraft, rather than waiting for the Boeing 777X, which inevitably is going to be delayed even further if there is no updates on this soon? Now, there is a nice actual specific answer to this question, and that is that Emirates are very vocal about not ordering the A350-1000 because Tim Clark, the president of Emirates, is not satisfied that the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB 97 engines on the A350-1000, he's not satisfied that they perform properly in the Middle East in hot, harsh, sandy, dusty environments. And this is true for airlines in the region that operate the 350-1000. The engines, it's not that there is an issue with them, it's that the number of cycles is much less than what Airbus and Rolls-Royce had previously promised, meaning that it needs maintenance at a faster rate than what was originally advertised. And for Emirates, they say that is a problem, and that problem doesn't exist on the Trent engine on the A350-900, hence they've ordered the 900 and not the 1000.
Yeah, exactly. So I got this funny post from Henry who shares, I'll show it in video, but just to explain to all the rest of you, Pedro Pascal, a big actor, it's a photo of him here from a page called Viral Pop
Europe.
Culture, and it goes, Pedro Pascal spotted flying economy. Which is, of course, that's what they assume. And then Henry is like, it's not economy, it's just European business class. Which is so funny because I feel like we read stories like this now and then about, oh, this celebrity is so humble, they fly economy. It's like, no, they're actually just forced to sit in Club Europe.
Oh, well, let me tell you this. This is a bit gossipy, but you know the actor, let me get the name right. Hold on. Okay. You know the actor Tom Hiddleston?
Yeah.
So Tom Hiddleston was on my flight last week, and he was in business and I was in first. And I was alone in first. And Tom Hiddleston apparently, according to another passenger who told me this at the bar, was quite peed off, thinking that his assistant had booked him the business class Q suite, basically, with the door so that he would have full privacy, but instead he was on the A380, which is not so private, excellent product, but not private. And he had inquired if there was anyone in first class or if there was any space in first class, of which the crew apparently informed him that there was one person in the first class, yours truly, and the first class was empty, but they couldn't upgrade him because it's not policy to do onboard upgrades. And so apparently he wasn't best pleased, and he was, he was a man of the people in business, but I was not a man of the people on that flight. I was alone in first.
If you had played the long game and thought strategically, you should have offered him your seat, and I'm sure you would have got some nice, a nice relationship out of that.
Like tickets, to the premiere or whatever of his next movie. I'm like, yeah, I'll pass. I'll take an early night.
All right. So John asks, recently Delta and Korean Air acquired stakes in WestJet. Why do we think WestJet has resisted joining an alliance for so long? And do we think this is a step toward WestJet joining SkyTeam?
To answer the last part of that question, I do. Yes. I think that airlines are realizing the power of partnerships, and I think that they will be in SkyTeam over the next 3 years. I'll put it on the record.
It's so hard because there's this duality of airlines choosing a few very close partners that sometimes happen to be in a specific alliance, but also airlines caring less and less about their other alliance partners and about joining alliances. So I definitely think we see Delta invest in, these airlines that are famously alliance-less. They stole LATAM out of Oneworld. Now we have WestJet. If I remember correctly, they invest in El Al, or at least they're close partners with El Al, another alliance-less airline. So that's just Delta's thing, and they don't really seem to care at all about SkyTeam, from my perspective. They also have their transatlantic joint venture, Trans-Pacific with Korean Air. So they're close there. But if you look at their other SkyTeam partner, China Airlines, they're not in on the fun. And I don't feel like Delta's, even cares about them. So I wouldn't say that this tells me, okay, WestJet is joining, SkyTeam, but I will say that I do
think that moving towards each other.
They will likely form partnerships with the other airlines that Delta has partnerships with, but I think maybe that will be enough for them because perhaps they don't care about the other airlines that they're not partnered with. We could also see a Riyadh Air partnership coming up. I don't know.
Oh, can we give that a break? Seriously. And on that, no, I think you're right. We might see a partnership. I mean, they've already struck a few partnerships, haven't they, with Delta and others.
Yeah.
Well, look, we will regroup this time next week with what else is happening in the world of aviation, and we'll also hear about your travels and all in between. In the meantime, remember to listeners and to any viewers that you are able to reach Dan and myself via our shared Instagram. That's kind of the preferred platform now. It's at On Air with it's at On Air with Dan and Alex. That's the shared Instagram for the podcast and nothing further.
Yeah.
And with that,
there's only two guys I have shared Instagram with Oscar and Alex.
Great.
So count yourself special.
Please, I'm going to establish we should do an Alex and the listeners. That should be an account.
All right. Well, I will see you next week on air. Take care.
See you later.